Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Yeah, that's good. Oh, wow, that's a good solution, actually. I quite like it. Okay, well, hello and welcome. My name is Mattia Romani. I'm going to moderate the session. I'm a partner at Systemic and a fellow at London School of Economics. And just for the ones of you who may not know, Systemic is a systems change advisory and investment firm based in London, but with offices a bit all over the world. I lead the sustainable finance work at Systemic. And we've been involved with the Ukrainian government for the last 3 years or so on helping them think through what does a green reconstruction look like for Ukraine. Quite in some depth, and I have my colleague Micah, who will answer all the difficult questions on these 3 sectors, of course, which are clean energy, green steel, and CRM. These are the sectors we were, and we work with tons of private sector companies, really trying to dig deep and asking them, what is that you need in order to come in? And the answer is multifaceted, but invariably part of the answer is we need some form of war insurance or some form of guarantees that reduces significantly our risk when we invest in Ukraine. So this is really the challenge, and we have multiple players here that are in some cases providing some of the blended finance instruments that can help reduce that risk. In some cases, investing in innovative technologies that can be deployed more quickly. So it's actually a very practical challenge. It's a fantastic group of people. We're all committed to ensuring that Ukraine can reconstruct its economy in the greenest possible manner and be part of a green European industrial ecosystem. So what do we need to do, and what are the opportunities there? So I'm not going to introduce each of you because I'm going to spend the whole panel doing that. So I'm just going to go one by one and ask you to share who you are, but also try to answer the question as precisely as you can and build on the previous person's point so that we can actually at the end have a consistent narrative that can advance this agenda. Is that a good one? Yep. You got it? Okay. So Felicity, let me start with you. EBRD, very important role. You're new to EBRD, but EBRD is not new to Ukraine. And so I'd love to hear what are the kind of things that EBRD is doing that you think can be transformational in opening up investment opportunities in the green space today?
Thank you very much. So the EBRD has donated 3.6 billion, 3.1 in loans and 0.5 in grants, primarily looking at energy. So initially we were looking at decentralized energy sector investments, but have since moved towards renewable energy. And to sort of come to what does it look like to invest, I think there's 5 things that make a project or an investment ready, which is revenue stability, which is part of that risk mitigation. And I'll come to unpack that more because that's a big thing we're doing. Addressing price and market risk, the need for stable, transparent and predictable regulatory environment to fundamentally remove barriers to the private sector, as well as institutional collaboration. So we share risk in our investments with other MDBs, so we're not going it alone. And I think that's a key message I want to convey about anybody operating is we need to do it together because it is a high risk. So in terms of the kind of things we've been looking at, as I said, we started off looking at CapEx, liquidity restoration for decentralized activities, regenerating hydrogen, looking at methane and gas distribution, but we're now very interested in renewable energy, and we're looking at a risk mitigation mechanism. I don't know whether I should unpack that in detail now or let.
Why don't we move on, and then you tell us a little bit later how this mechanism works, because it'd be, I think, very instrumental today. Okay, so microphone over to Jody. Agriculture, nature, absolutely central to growth in Ukraine. Tell us a little bit about what TELUS is doing. What is the potential to really push on that sector today in Ukraine?
Thank you so much. So for those that don't know me, my name is Jody Braga. I'm one of the co-founders of TELUS. We're a nature-based project developer. Since the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine, we actually set up a philanthropic project originally, where we've now been financing 10 national parks across the country for just over 3 years, covering 500,000 hectares of land for conservation. We are a company. Our other projects elsewhere work through private sector investment. And so we're now urgently looking at opportunities to utilize that model for sustainable financing through Ukraine. What we've landed on is actually biochar, which itself is a nature-based solution. Given the areas, given the land tenure issues currently existing in Ukraine, biochar offers an opportunity for us to be able to use the existing biomass that our national parks produce as a way of providing a sustainable financing mechanism. So we're now heavily involved in that and are actually switching to our private sector model of getting investment in and then putting those sites around the national parks to then provide that sustainable financing. Just so you know, we're actually going to continue to run this as a philanthropic project as well, because of our commitment to Ukraine until victory. I think it is a point I'd like to acknowledge now as well. Here we are all sort of just having a bit of a week of freedom of speech, a week about talking what we're doing. And I think it really is important to acknowledge the men and women of the armed forces of Ukraine right now who are fighting for that freedom of speech in a conflict which is being funded by fossil fuels as well. So I think it's worth us taking that point. I've got a bunch of barriers and opportunities I want to go through later on in the panel, but I'll pass on to my esteemed partner. Crack on.
Fantastic. I don't have to do much. Travis, tell us about peace RECs, renewable energy certificates that your organization is developing.
Sure. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here at the Ukraine Pavilion. My first COP was 4 years ago now at Sharm el-Sheikh, and one of the first sessions that I went to was talking about the climate impact of war. Obviously, there's a human, social, economic impact, but there's a huge amount of carbon emissions associated with it, loss of nature, and it really feels like I'm coming full circle by being on this panel today. As you said, my name is Travis. I work for an organization called Evident. We developed IREC, the sort of global renewable energy certificate standard, and we operate in around 60 countries worldwide outside of Europe and North America. And one of our partners, Energy Peace Partners, developed something very innovative around 5 years ago called the Peace REC. Essentially what the Peace REC is, it's like any other renewable energy certificate, which is issued to renewable energy project developers and then sold to businesses who want to claim the renewable energy attributes. And that finance then goes back to the project developers themselves. The Peace REC is specifically targeted towards countries where there is very high climate risk, very high conflict risk, and very low electrification risk. So we've been working with them across 12 countries, predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, over the last sort of 5 years now. And really just since being here, we've been sparking this discussion around the potential to bring that instrument to Ukraine when it comes to de-risking the investment in renewable energy projects as part of that overall green construction. So happy to talk a bit more later about how that could be deployed and some case studies that we've got from sub-Saharan Africa. But I will pass on to Heather for now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Heather, Bankers for Net Zero, it's a tremendous opportunity for you to tell us from your perspective, what are your members saying are the obstacles that they face even when they want to invest in net zero in a place that is in the middle of a conflict and where security is an issue and risks?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think that first and foremost, I think one of the issues that we have here is there's risk and there's perceived risk. And I think one of the things that I do kind of go back to a lot of, when I go and speak, is everybody talks about when the war ends, when the war ends, and when the war ends. Anybody that's been to Ukraine recently knows that, as soon as something gets bombed, they're practically rebuilding it. And then there's repairs and there's, keeping the lights on, and there's a lot of innovation and life's kind of moving on. So I think that there's first and foremost a bit of an education piece that the world, isn't standing still. And if anything, kind of innovation is accelerated, as we know, because of the urgency. but critically, I mean, insurance. It always comes back to insurance, but insurance can take many different forms. Whether that's first loss guarantees. We're doing some work that we've been doing with the FCDO in other countries as well, but essentially looking at how do you get finance flowing into high risk economies. And so first and foremost, perceived versus real risk, the amount of data that we've got. And I know that Ukraine's been mapped out in terms of risk per square kilometer and down to asset level. So the actual level of data that's required for financial decisions is actually quite robust within that, and you can mitigate that. But again, there's a perception that's not possible per se. And then I think that, and I won't speak too much about this because I've got Michael at the end here, who'll more about the Article 6.2 stuff. But one of the financing mechanisms we're looking at is the kind of nascent markets of Article 6.2. The reason I'm very keen on really pushing this within a Ukraine context is it is a new market, so we're all figuring it out globally in terms of how the kind of standards will get implemented per se. But there's very few places in the world right now where you almost have this, apologies for the expression, the perfect storm, but you have very high political interest, political will, a very educated and motivated workforce that can scale up industries very quickly in a country that's going for European integration. So just the actual process of kind of capacity building, regulatory infrastructure, legislative infrastructure, all of that ability to adapt really quickly is already baked in there. So I think we've got some really interesting opportunities where Ukraine can actually be very much at the leading edge of some of these de-risking mechanisms as well.
That's great. Fantastic. And I'm sure the Felicity will tell us more about what some of them are and how they work, what EBRD does. But let me turn to Amy. Marsh has worked extensively on advising on climate strategies. What do you hear from your clients? What are they telling you? And what do you think are the things which are relevant to Ukraine in this context?
Well, I love having a banker say how important insurance is. So thank you very much. Amy Barns, I lead on climate and sustainability strategy at Marsh. And I also have the privilege of leading our global energy and power business. And when people think about insurance, they often think about sort of property insurance, the fact that once these assets are built or while they're being built, they need to be insured. And that's really challenging in an area that has conflict. But I think that the topic of this is when we think about financing, it's the role that insurance can play to support financing. So the credit insurance, the credit risk, the non-payment risk. I think there are some significant risks with the limited dollars that are being transacted. And if debt needs to be serviced in dollars and the dollars are prioritized elsewhere, how does that be supported by private insurance as well as the institutions that are doing things in the public sector? I can geek out on insurance and the challenge that we've got between the difference between war exclusions and political violence. They're different exclusions, and we have to think about which are they, because insurance will respond differently. And we're also doing a lot of work to think about how do we convince the 95% of the global reinsurance industry that have blanket exclusions on any Ukrainian business of any form. How do we support that? Because that's stopping people getting travel insurance. It's stopping people have all kinds of access to the risk transfer tools that they would conventionally use when going into it. I can talk about the climate risks, but I think actually they're probably the more relevant insurance risks for this introduction.
No, thank you very much, Amy. And I fully agree with you. We know very well that what's not insurable, it's not investable. You can hear me? You can? Okay. All right. So yes, I was saying that what's not insurable, it's not investable. It's fairly clear. Right. Last but not least on this first round, Michael, capital markets, Article 6.2. What can Ukraine gain from that? And what are the mechanisms in place?
Sure. So my name is Michael Kril-Matres. Kril is my Ukrainian name and Matrес is my Cambodian name. So I believe I'm the only Ukrainian on this panel. So I'm glad to present the fatherland. So why am I here? I think it's very nice to have the MDBs, to have the project developer and philanthropic money as much as we can, to have the renewable energy certificates, to have the bankers, to have the insurers, but we need a plan. And so 5 years ago, the Coalition for Rainforest Nations called me and said, Michael, we have a problem. We don't know how to bridge the capital markets and the carbon markets. Last week, we managed to issue with Deutsche Bank the world's first large transaction on Article 6 with 2 countries, Honduras and Suriname. It took us 4 years. I'm not saying it's going to take 4 years with Ukraine, but we have all the plans, all the systems, all the safeguards, everything in place. In fact, it's on my computer, so I hope I don't lose it, but everything is there to implement this plan at Ukraine level. What we were waiting for was the NDC. So as you probably know, the Ukraine's NDC was actually published this week, actually, a few days ago. So that's the first step. Now we need to deconstruct it, analyze it, and then come up with a plan for Ukraine with everybody here with this ecosystem so that we can provide the necessary capital to Ukraine to reconstruct it in a green and sustainable way. And so that's what ITMO does. We do it under the UNFCCC and under Article 6. And I'm just raring to go to implement it and start everything, because I know we can do it, and we just have to get going right now. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Michael. You're right. We have actually quite a magical team here, because in a way, we got the whole thing. So we should be able to find solutions for that. So I'm going to turn to, as I promised, to Felicity for a second to tell us how can we unlock this magical team, and what are the tools that EBRD has to unlock this magical team? Because it's obviously commercial interest. We know potential for the Ukrainian economy is very, very large. Investors are interested in that space. What can you help unlock the momentum? And by the way, such a small group, and it's a group of experts. So don't consider the panel and audience. If you guys have something to add to this conversation, put up your hand and we'll give it a microphone. Let's make it as much as possible a conversation to resolve some of the issues. Felicity.
So I think what we can do is obviously bring money onto the table to buy down risk, so this concessional financing option. But clearly in a war environment, it's not going to be the same as a non-war environment. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you is what we're working on, which is a risk mitigation mechanism called Ramp Up. And this is work that we're doing with the IFC and the World Bank to try and find. The problem in the Ukraine is there's not a, my headphones are turning on and off, sorry, but so it's a bit disturbing. Yeah. So the Ramp Up program aims to basically drive renewable energy investments, and it aims to do this by establishing an approach for addressing price volatility in the market, and the fact that you don't have a bankable counterparty for investment, which is always a problem when you have companies that have price volatility. So usual power purchase agreements don't function, and nor do merchant agreements, because even with the daily, even though the DAMs, the daily actual market rates, which they base their investments on, are looking good for renewable energy, no one trusts them in this, which comes to your point about perceived and real risk, right? So the perceived risk is the war. It's not going to stay the same. The data is telling us it's looking good. So we have to overcome that. So that's what we're trying to do with Ramp Up. And we're trying to mobilize 1.6 billion to do 2 things: to drive renewable energy auctions, which set a stable price for the contractors, which will enable us, so the bankers, to invest, simultaneously working with the Ukrainian government to establish the enabling environment, the governance structure, the rules and regulations that facilitate that private sector engagement. So I think this is an interesting, innovative way that allows us to bring in concessional finance to a targeted outcome in a way which hasn't been done before. So, interested to hear your response, and I can go into more specific details, but I'm kind of curious what people think about it. And there will be challenges ahead. So this is work in progress, but we do think that it could drive, I think, hold on, let me just get the figure right. There was the scale of the 1 gigawatt new renewable energy. So it's really at scale, right? Like, we're not talking, we're still investing in the decentralized biomethane. We're still investing in hydro replenishment. Sorry, it's really difficult. And we're also protecting Chernobyl, doing a lot of investment there. So it's just going on.
Fantastic. Thank you. We could hear you fine. So at least that's great. And so a little bit, it seems to me that Travis, you are well placed to tell us a little bit on whether of that, if you want, creates some certainty on prices, is the kind of thing that you've seen work elsewhere, and whether and how that instrument can be scaled up and used in the most effective manner by developers.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, the challenge with renewable energy certificates is that it's typically annual demand and payment on delivery. And a lot of these energy access projects in sub-Saharan Africa need the upfront capital in order to develop mini grids, solar PV, etc. So one thing that our partners at Energy Peace Partners have been working on is the first ever aggregated facility fund. It'll be a pilot of 10 million US dollars that will unlock some of the capital, I think eventually 9 times that initial 10 million to provide the upfront capex to the renewable energy project developers in sub-Saharan Africa. And that will be for around 57 megawatt capacity, and it will be delivering energy access for around 325,000 households. It will help avoid 500 million tons of CO2 over the project's lifetime. And, you know, these are communities who don't have access to power. Today, they're using diesel generators. And I think that's something that is obviously a huge challenge around energy security in Ukraine. And so it's one potential model alongside what you're working on that could be deployed in a similar way in Ukraine. I'm not that technical to go into, you know, how that might be done, but maybe some people on the panel have some ideas there. Yeah.
No, that's great. There's a very complementary, if you want, system to what Felicity was suggesting. Heather, can I ask you in here 2 things? So first of all, we have an instrument in place, new instrument by the EBRD, very ambitious on what it can do. Is it enough for your members who are managers say, okay, well, now we feel more comfortable that we can invest? Are there still some bits missing, and what are they?
Yeah, so it's not enough probably, but I think this is kind of where you get much more creative. And unfortunately, right now, a lot of finance, particularly in higher risk areas, it's still kind of a bit boutique. You have to. There's no one size fits all solution. It'd be lovely if we could just do a nice
a little bit closer to the microphone.
Yeah, it'd be lovely if we could do have just a nice little one size fits all program where you just go in with a bit of risk and everybody feels comfortable. It is much more kind of dynamic than that, and also what kind of partners play role depends on the really basic word that I'm forgetting here, the project pipeline, as it were. So, but that's where we need better coordination, you know what I mean, and collaboration. So that's really what a lot of what we do, is kind of bring all the partners together. And we're doing some similar work, actually. We'll chat afterwards about sub-Saharan Africa as well, doing some stuff with the UAE and sub-Saharan Africa. But in order to kind of get over that risk, there are so many different pieces of the puzzle, and it is sometimes that giving comfort that there is the policy development, that there's the capacity building that's happening along the way, that there's pipeline development. So, any one bit in and of itself, we're not really going to get the scale unless we have that much more kind of coordinated approach where we can have different partners come in, and philanthropic capital, I think, is another really kind of key area. It's philanthropic capital itself is getting a lot savvier. So, bigger family offices and stuff like that. And so also looking at where you can get capital like that for maybe, a fund that's interested in energy systems change or financial systems change, that can help with that capacity building piece and to bring everything together. But realistically, the more of those kind of pieces of the puzzle that we can have in a coordinated, way, then that will help create the confidence that we need. And sometimes, a political wrapper helps around these things as well, sometimes to get people to move a bit beyond their comfort zones.
That's great. I actually really like your answer, because in a way it says peace is essential. We need other bits. That's exactly the experience we had as Systemic when we tried to pull together the right actor for both clean energy, green steel, and CRM development. the early stage equity was a massive problem because the EBRD and other IFI had lined up solutions for that, but the project needs still a few years of at-risk capital. And the large corporates are not quite there in terms of willingness to sink significant amounts of capital into Ukraine today, particularly when it comes to high capex projects where you're not going to recover that capex easily if the risk situation doesn't improve quickly. That element, if anybody has got any ideas on that, it would be great. And I'll bring you in. I want also to bring in an online speaker. I think we have, is it Oksana who's joining? Oh, no, it's not. It's somebody else. Well, we'll bring them in. Oh, sorry. Say it in the microphone, please. I don't know. Anyway, we have one online speaker who I thought was but it's not. So let me go online for a second. Then we go back to Joby. And then I'm going to ask Michael whether carbon markets can provide some of that at-risk money for the early stage investment, and how could we use that instrument better? All right. So the Oksana, who is it that wanted to come in? Alina, was that you?
Yeah. Hi. Do you hear me? Hello, everyone.
Loud and clear. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's so great panel, and it's a big honor for me to be present here. So I'm Alina Sokolenko, and I represent Ukraine itself. Actually, I have two roles in Ukraine. So I'm a head on a nonprofit organization, Association of Sustainable Development Experts. And at the same time, I'm the head of consultancy in Ukraine, who supports Ukrainian business moving toward US session and actually supporting them with funding from EBRD, IFC, and other development banks. And actually, my key message was more to show the real picture that is on the ground, because when we are talking in general about financial market and insurance and all other stuff, we need also to consider the real situation, what Ukrainian business faces right now. And same for all other key players like municipalities, government itself, and new rules that is on the market. And the most challenging, what we can see right now, is SME actually, because SME plays like more than 80% of economy. So it's something that is missing right now, but it's under development. And right now, what we see on the market in Ukraine, that really there are a lot of challenges, but as I'm from sustainability sphere, so I would like to address more on ESG and sustainability. That is something that is very new for Ukraine. And at the same time, what we see that the regulator push towards ESG implementation on different levels, on corporate levels, on first of all in the banking sector. So it is something that is coming as another risk for the entities, because there is the need for Ukrainian business to have this access to the capital, because if we will just go through the main risk, so ENS risk, ESG risk will be a new one that the Ukrainian business are facing right now. And the colleagues on the stand already mentioned that. I think that we will discuss more on that one. So
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much, Alina, for your comments. It's very, very helpful. So let's, for a second, talk about catalytic equity and early stage equity and carbon markets and the play. I know that it's difficult, but I'll tell you what I have in mind, since we are trying to find a solution. And then I'll turn back to Marsh, to Amy, if I can, to have some comments on that. But please, Joby.
Thank you. And I'm really glad we brought up early stage project development finance, because it is the thing that keeps you awake at night. Really, guys, as a project developer, as someone working on the ground across a number of high risk jurisdictions, we also work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. Early stage project development finance is the one thing that is stopping this market from scaling up. I'll give you a bit of an example. I mentioned we're working in the DRC. We have a nature-based carbon project there where we're doing 22,000 hectares of restoration. I was in a situation this year where we had a term sheet and full carbon 100% offtake for $63 million, and I couldn't raise $620,000 to finish the development finance. We spent 6 months looking at that finance. So I spent more time raising 600 grand than I did 63 million because of the risks that people see with the early stage financing, because they want to come in when it's all like wrapped up, when it's an oven ready project. It's a real issue. I feel like the problems will exist in Ukraine, but we do have solutions, and I've come here with solutions for this. The first one is go local. We ended up actually getting financing through a local entity in the DRC because local investors understand the risk of where they're working. It's not big and scary. It's not that big a deal. And the big players in it, like the development banks or the big institutional investors in London and Paris, don't want to mess around with 650 grand. So actually the local investor, the high net worth individuals, the institutions, etc., that's the kind of ticket size that they're after. And that was how we unlocked that project, and we ended up moving through. So again, I think that will be our strategy in Ukraine. The second one on this is just regionalization. And I know, Heather, you travel out to Ukraine a lot. Obviously, what we see in the news is not always reflective on the ground. There are large swathes of Ukraine where normal life continues day by day, and people are getting on with their lives. People are making money. People are building and innovating and trying new things. So getting that message across to investors and ensuring that regionalized approach to Western Ukraine versus the front line versus Western DRC to the conflicts in the East is key, and key how we kind of push that through. And then secondly, as well, is if there are project developers listening or people that want to invest, it's just building in insurance into your program. For example, when you structure a nature-based carbon project such as like we did in the DRC, making sure that your SPV relationship to your project co is all sort of fits in for MEGA compliance, and that way you get the big opportunities to work with organizations like MEGA, but also hoping that the private sector begins to develop more insurance tools for project development and finance in particular. And there are some great startups coming out in that space now. I think within the nature-based solution space, Kita, etc., have actually given us insurability letters for places like the DRC, and we're going to go straight to them for Ukraine as well.
That's great. The microphone here, because we have a double hander before Michael comes in. Double hander is from when you said, "Oh, I need 600,000 for project prep," she started opening her wallet. So maybe EBRD has a little bit of money for that.
Please.
No.
Oh.
No. What I wanted to say is that like the EBRD, it's not that we're not interested in small, medium enterprises. It's just that we normally, to address that, would on-lend to the financial institutions in the country of operation for all the reasons you say, because we don't understand the local context. The transaction costs are insurmountable. So we regularly on-lend, and it's 40% of our investments are through developing capacity in financial institutions so they can support their local counterparts. So I would love to open my pocket, but that's a separate pocket to the EBRD. Yeah, but that just to address that, I think that the MDBs are aware of this small scale problem. At the same time, due to our risk appetite, is a reflection of our board, which is a reflection of your governments. We are limited. So, but we are trying to address that problem through on-lending.
Yeah, and I mean, EBRD does have a project preparation facility that actually has sometimes checks for 600K to start projects. A very effective one as well. One of the better ones among the IFIs, in fact. Michael, I wanted you to come in and I tell you what I had in mind. So you'll have to explain to us, to the extent that it's possible at the stage of the negotiations, how 6.2 can create more visibility on carbon revenues for projects, and whether that visibility on carbon revenues for project on the back of a 6.2 article deal could become a bankable asset in a country and help unlock more finance before that carbon is delivered.
Yeah, your logic is correct. So your thinking is correct. The only problem is that we don't have the systems in place in Ukraine. So, and it's a good thing that DRC was mentioned, because we work with DRC as well. And it's a good example because DRC, although they're not at war, there are conflict areas in DRC. And yet it does not stop the DRC government and Minister Ev, who's a lovely lady, I love her to death. She is going full scale on, Article 6 and implementing the right measures. And we were that close to releasing the first Article 6 credits from DRC this year, but there were a few failures, especially on the baseline and things like that we can figure out. But what I'm trying to say is that they themselves are on their way to getting Article 6 credits. So there's no reason why we can't do the same thing with Ukraine. Of course, we'll need a bit of capital to build the capacity to make this happen. But because the more bankers, the more capital market players, the more insurers understand what this Article 6 asset class is, the better it is for all of us, because then they'll be able to fit it with their clients, with their portfolio, or with new mechanisms, or a pre-finance facility that could, unleash the plan for Ukraine. I mean, we're talking about doing a pilot project maybe of 100,000 tons at $25. That's $2.5 million that you can lend to Ukraine to build that capacity. That's just 100,000 tons. I mean, I haven't done the proper analysis yet of Ukraine's NDC, but I'm sure we can find a project somewhere in Ukraine for 100,000 tons. So the logic is correct, but we need to implement those systems first. And that's our goal, really, to do that. But we can have a parallel track where we do just that, where we're already speaking with the MDBs, with the bankers to figure out, hey, can you guys lend a bit of money so that we can implement this plan? Yeah. And then we'll, issue those this Article 6 asset class.
That seems a very natural role for IFIs to play as this market is being formed.
Absolutely.
I fully agree. I just wanted to turn to Amy for a second. Amy, insurance came up in some conversation up to now. Can you just tell us, in the context of Ukraine, what can an insurance company that acts commercially and behaves commercially, what kind of products which are relevant to this conversation are offered today or can be tailored today by private insurance companies?
And we shouldn't forget that Ukraine has an insurance market. We don't just need to rely on the global market. So if I talk about the global market, first of all, I think one of the critical things is having the MDBs and the export finance credit agencies, because if we're thinking about, first of all, credit insurance, so the non-payment risk, and that non-payment could be because of export controls, or it could be because of financial insolvency. The insurers are nervous of that, not just because of the war, but because they don't have the relationships to get resolution to these claims. Whereas the EBRD have far more sway with the Ukrainian government. If there's an issue with securing enough hard currency, the EBRD has relationships it can leverage to secure that. So insurers are far more minded to sit behind those other finance institutes. So just as EBRD can on-lend to banks in country, insurers are more likely to provide reinsurers behind those institutions than they are direct. There are a couple of insurers that will write direct insurance that don't have exclusions for Ukraine, which is not quite the same as putting Ukrainian risk. We then talked about, briefly touched on insurance for carbon credits. So insurance for carbon credits can get very complicated very quickly, and it really depends on the principle that you're talking about. Are you talking about the investor, the developer, or the off-taker? Because there's a different insurance solution for each of those parties. But there are credit insurance, and Kita exactly provides a credit insurance against the developers. That I think there are ways of providing insurances in Ukraine, which comes back to, I can't remember who made the point, but the need for data. And that's why we started a data utility in 2023, mapping every location where there has been either a missile or a drone attack and the type of asset that's been damaged. So we've got 2 years of data that shows that 60% of Ukraine is not being impacted by conflict or has been impacted by conflict to date. And so how do we get insurers to stop treating Ukraine as a monolith, which it is, and to treat it let's start with easy. Let's start with the West and unblock the West, although we still need the finance to come to the East. So what can we do in the West to make sure that those blanket exclusions aren't preventing really good work from happening? So a whole range of insurance, including the underlying risk. There's a large project that we've just done in the US, so absolutely no political. Did I just say that? I do hope I'm not being recorded. Oh my word. So very different risks, I probably should have said, where even JP Morgan, and it's in the public domain, so I can mention all the counterparts, even JP Morgan would not lend against a project which had Microsoft as an off-taker without an insurance being put in place for the underlying risk. So the performance risks of the carbon credits themselves. So those products do exist. So if we can disaggregate the thinking around Ukraine, so it's not a monolith, then there's no reason why those insurances couldn't be available tomorrow.
That's great. Thank you. That's very encouraging in a way, because I think the need for direct insurance would be quite significant. At least we hear from the partners that we've been talking to that the lack of being able to insure through particularly those early stage project development components is a major obstacle.
But I hope I didn't say it would be easy.
No, you didn't. You didn't. It's very, that's very clear. Your point on data is very good. And I want to bring in Travis, because in a way, you guys must be sitting on an enormous amount of data for the countries where you operate on the renewable certificates. And I just want to understand, in other countries where you have the peace recs or are at-risk countries, are you able to provide data that help investors distinguish? So if you want, be more precise about perceived risk versus realized risks in project. How does that work? And I'm going to turn to the audience in a minute to see if either here or online, anybody wants to make any comments or ask any questions.
Sure, yeah. Certainly in terms of some of the upfront purchases that have already been made by various corporates. So the likes of Google and Microsoft have done some of the first corporate offtakes of PRECs. Whilst we have been speaking about DRC, that was actually one of the very first projects that Energy Peace Partners did. It was a 1.7 megawatt mini grid in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The biggest challenge that we have around peace recs is, as with carbon credits as well, is around that demand piece. Typically, a corporate would buy a renewable energy certificate to reduce their Scope 2 emissions. And you have to geographically match where the production of energy happened and where you're reporting. And not a lot of multinationals operate within sub-Saharan Africa, but their suppliers might. And I think that is a huge opportunity potentially for Ukraine, that where there are upstream or downstream suppliers, corporates who are turning to them and saying, you need to be powered by renewables, would potentially allow for some of that demand to come in from Fortune 500 companies who are signed up to RE 100. They have renewable electricity use mandates. So that is certainly one thing that I think could help generate a bit of that corporate offtake to make the emerging renewable energy projects.
That's great. Let me see if there's anybody that wants to come in, or if there's any questions online. If not, I would ask, I would put you in front of the following challenge for closing. A year from now, we meet and some solutions have come up. What would they need to be to make you happy that we are advancing in the right direction in terms of resolving some of the problems that you face, either as developer, or investors, or IFIs, in trying to accelerate investments in areas which are in conflict or at risk? What is the one simple thing that, and some came up during the conversation, and you have 30 seconds each for that. Are you ready? Okay. Michael, I'm afraid I'm going to start with you. I'm sorry. It's a maximum pressure. Oh, dear. It's a nice challenge.
I want to be at the end.
All right. I'll start then in the middle. Heather, you have the microphone. Off you go.
Okay. So in a year, we've got a plan. Actually, we've got a pretty good plan about how we can make this all work. So we just need partners. So I would hope to think that in a year, I'll have twisted a few arms here, and we'll have worked together to start to get.
Fantastic. All right. Going. Partners. That's very good. Travis, your 30 seconds.
Mine's very simple. Let's bring Peace Rec to Ukraine. There is an emerging rec market framework in Ukraine. We don't provide the registry, but I would love to bring the idea, the label to developers to start getting some of that capital into the market.
Amazing. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right, Jody, what do you think?
I think hopefully in a year's time, first of all, we have victory. And then secondly, I hope that we have a coalition, because one of the few things we don't have on this panel is an off-taker. I hope we have a coalition of off-takers that are coming together to de-risk purchases of carbon credits within high conflict or recovering conflict zones, such as the DRC, Ukraine, etc., etc.
That's amazing. Michael's going to give you some food for thought, this one. Felicity.
A successful ramp-up project in 1 year's time, which shows how you overcome counterparty risk in war zones and shows how you can scale, produce scale, to your point about this regional thing within the Ukraine, so driving 1 gigawatts to support that victory.
Fantastic. Amy, your 30 seconds.
I think I'd put my credits behind Felicity's aim, but other than that, I would bifurcate, and I'd be thinking about, from an insurance perspective, getting insurers to think about East and West Ukraine separately.
Wonderful. That's great. And last but not least.
So I agree with everybody, and I just wanted to announce something, because Heather and I had lunch a few weeks ago at the Ivy in London, and then we came up with an idea. We're going to organize a Green Recovery Summit in London in the first quarter of 2026. So it's a high-level thing, and we would like to invite obviously everybody here on this panel, and let's start to create a green recovery maybe working group, so that we have the right plan that will maybe be announced it should be in March or April of 2026, and then when it comes to COP31, whether it's in Turkey or Australia, I'd rather it be in Turkey because it's closer to Ukraine, and we'll get more Ukrainians involved. But and then we can have, you know, the first finance tranches of whatever it is, carbon credits, renewable energy credits, ready, maybe even delivered by COP31.
Fantastic. So we have a 1 year plan, and we have a half a year moment in which in 6 months we'll come together and check how we're doing on that plan.
Yes, you're all invited.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, look, thank you very much for all the comments and contributions. If you enjoyed this talk and you love Ukraine, show up tomorrow at 12. My colleague, Micah, will take us through the work on clean energy and CRMs, very interesting work. And the last thing that is left for me to do, besides thanking you all for participating today, is to really thank the Ukrainian government for hosting us here today, and Darka for her enormous work and bringing this together. Thank you.